Dear Taurus, there's an invisible investigation happening in your life, but you're not the one being questioned. You are being protected by the laws of the universe, shielded by the very steadfastness you have cultivated. A shift is occurring in the cosmic realm, and those who once treated your patience as a given, who took your loyalty for granted, are now standing before an unseen court of justice. Hold your heart steady as I share this with you, because this message isn't just guidance, it's the beginning of a sacred vindication that the universe has been preparing for you all along. You know, I've always believed that everything happens for a reason, and right now, as we step into this first part together, I want you to understand something profound, that resilience you've carried, the one others called your stubbornness, is about to become your greatest strength. How many times have you been told you're too stubborn, that you're too slow, too practical, too resistant to change? I've seen it happen to so many Taurus souls, and I want you to know something: you were never too much. You were the solid ground this world desperately needed, even when it didn't know how to value your stability. You see, you weren't born to be a reed, bending with every whim of the wind. You were born to be a mountain, standing firm against every storm, feeling the tremors that others completely miss. That too much you carry, it's precisely what allows you to distinguish between what is real and what is merely a fleeting illusion. I've been studying the current planetary movements, and what I'm seeing is extraordinary. Uranus, the planet of sudden change and revealed truth, is still moving through your sign. This isn't just stirring up your life, it's breaking down the false structures around you, pulling to the surface the truths you've long sensed but never spoke. You may not feel ready for the upheaval, but the universe is ready to help you rebuild on a foundation of truth. If you've been feeling uneasy lately, like the ground is shaking beneath you, or sensing a pressure you can't explain, that's not random. That's a divine alert. A cosmic audit has begun. And you, dear Taurus, are the epicenter of this universal reckoning. I've heard people speak about Taurus with such misunderstanding in their voices. She's too stubborn, they say. He's too materialistic. But here's what I've witnessed time and time again: those same people panic when everything they built on lies begins to crumble, while you remain standing. Your steadfastness isn't a burden, beautiful soul. It's a sacred verification system that your spirit was gifted with. In all my years studying astrology, I've learned that Taurus is the only sign that can sense the rot within something, even when it's wrapped in the most beautiful packaging. Think about this in astrology. Taurus is the fixed earth sign, the symbol of tangible value and stability. That's why you don't just seek security for yourself, you create it for those around you. But that's also why you are so often taken for granted. You know a deal is unfair before the numbers are even crunched. You sense the instability in a relationship long before it breaks. You feel the insincerity in others even when they're smiling. And in a world that worships speed and superficiality, your deliberate pace is seen as a flaw. Worse, it's labeled as obstinance. But what is real always endures, doesn't it? Let me share something with you that really opened my eyes. I once knew a Taurus man, 55 years old, a master carpenter. He spent 2 years building a small business with a friend. He kept telling his partner they shouldn't cut corners on the quality of the wood, that the foundation has to be solid. His partner laughed at him, calling him old-fashioned. Eventually, the partner pushed him out of the company. 3 years later, that company went bankrupt after a series of customer complaints about product quality. Meanwhile, the small workshop the Taurus man built himself step by step, became renowned for its durability and quality. No one was surprised, except the one who had mistaken his integrity for foolishness. You see, truth doesn't need agreement. It only needs you to believe in it, to not abandon the core values the universe planted within you. There's an ancient teaching that says, the mountain doesn't need to move, it just needs to stand still, and the storm will pass. Your steadfastness, often mistaken for stubbornness, is actually the first step toward lasting prosperity. And that prosperity doesn't come from tricks. It comes from every time you dared to trust your principles, even when the world was chasing illusions. You might be listening to this in solitude, in a quiet room where no one seems to understand why you refuse to take shortcuts. But let me tell you this truth, you are not being rigid. You are being activated. Uranus in your sign is asking you to return to your core values as if they were a compass. Remember this: have you felt uneasy about a recent promise? Is there a relationship that makes you feel like your resources are being drained? Is there a worry in your heart that no one else can see? That's not negativity. That's a sign that your soul, after too many betrayals, has learned how to read the language of reality. The universe is using you like a bedrock to test what is true and what is false. You don't need to do anything except trust this: your heart isn't too slow. It's simply waiting for something real enough to trust. Close your eyes for a moment. Place your hand on your chest and ask yourself, the last time I held my ground on something others called foolish, was I right in the end? If the answer is yes, then you already know what to do. In this next part, I want to show you how those who once caused you pain are entering a very dangerous zone, because the universe is no longer silent, and everything you quietly built will now be vindicated through action. Stay with me, because what comes next will make you believe that justice doesn't need a voice, it only needs time. And you, dear Taurus, are the embodiment of time. There are false promises people thought were lost to the past. There is labor of yours they believed was buried by time. But to a Taurus soul, nothing ever truly disappears, because you don't just remember, you record it. And every act of betrayal, no matter how small, leaves an entry in the universe's ledger. You have been silent. You have moved on. You have chosen to step back, thinking perhaps it was better to be generous. But now the universe is summoning those who exploited you, not so you can witness their downfall, but so you can witness truth being honored. And truth never overlooks anyone. I've been watching the planetary movements closely, and Saturn, the planet of karma and structure, is in a position that puts pressure on those who built their success on deceit. This isn't just an astrological event, it's a deep cleansing moment where those who once manipulated, lied to, or drained the resources of Taurus souls begin to reap the consequences of what they have sown. Don't be surprised if you hear that someone from your past is in financial trouble. Don't be alarmed if those who once belittled you suddenly vanish from your life. They haven't disappeared, they've been called to account. There's a divine principle that what is built on sand will fall, and every architect of a weak foundation will eventually be buried under its rubble. No one escapes that law, not even those who once hid behind a mask of kindness. I once knew a Taurus woman, gentle and hardworking, who devoted her life to her husband's family. One day, after her husband passed away, his family swindled her out of all the assets they had built together, leaving her with nothing. No one stood up for her. They isolated her, calling her greedy. For 5 long years, she didn't fight back, she didn't sue, she didn't blame. She just quietly moved into a small apartment, worked diligently, and raised her children. 5 years later, the family business collapsed due to internal disputes and poor financial decisions. During the bankruptcy proceedings, legal documents surfaced, proving that a large portion of the assets had legally belonged to her all along. The result, she received everything that was rightfully hers, and those who had cast her out had to issue a public apology. I'll never forget the look in her eyes as she told me this story. There was no smugness, only the peace of someone who knew she had never been wrong. That is true justice. It didn't come early, but it came right on time. You see, the universe doesn't need you to stand up and demand justice. It only needs you not to become what you despise. It only asks you to keep building, because only when you focus on creating value can heaven act on your behalf to clear away what is worthless. Those who once shattered your stability are now imprisoned in the very instability they created. They cannot go far because they never had a true foundation. They cannot be free because freedom only belongs to those with grounded souls. You may not see it right away, but listen to the signs. Those who once deceived you are now facing losses. Those who once slandered you are beginning to find themselves isolated. Those who once exploited you are now living in fear, not because you did anything, but because energy doesn't lie, and time is the most honest auditor. Take a deep breath. You don't need to scream to be defended. You don't need to prove that you're right. You only need to believe that every counterfeit brick they used to build their lives is now returning to its source. The universe doesn't forget, and you don't need to remember anymore, because the truth has begun to stand on its own. In this next part, you'll come to understand that what you're going through isn't punishment. It's the test of a soul carrying a divine mission to break a cycle of instability rooted in lifetimes before. Stay here, because what comes next is where you begin to see the real reason why you were born with this burden, and why it is you, not anyone else, who has the power to bring it to an end. Have you ever felt that the burden on your shoulders was too heavy, too immense, almost beyond understanding? Perhaps you've been carrying something that was never yours, to begin with, a responsibility with no explanation, a strange sense of lack, a feeling of having to be the strong one even when you were exhausted. You ask yourself, what did I do wrong? But the truth is, you did nothing wrong. You are simply the one who was chosen. This isn't a statement of blame. It's a call to awaken. The chaos surrounding you isn't merely personal. It's the echo of your ancestors' unresolved soul work. Current astrology reveals something profound. The lunar node axis, with the south node in Libra and the north node in Aries, is squaring planets in Cancer and Capricorn. For a Taurus native, this can powerfully activate your 4th house and 10th house, bringing inherited burdens or patterns of lack to the surface for healing and release. You are not just living, you are continuing a legacy of shouldering responsibility from souls before you. What they couldn't build, what they left in instability, is now rising within your own being. Ancient teachings tell us that rebirth doesn't only happen across lifetimes, it flows through bloodlines. We are reborn into the burdens of our grandparents. If you've ever felt like you keep repeating an ancient pattern, like carrying the financial weight of your entire family, always being the only reliable one, or being trapped in self-sacrifice, it might not be your story. It could be energy imprinted in your bloodstream, waiting for someone strong enough to step forward and build a new legacy. Many Taurus souls carry burdens they never created, They are the ones chosen to end them. Let me tell you about an elderly Taurus woman who lived in a small house in the countryside all her life. She never understood why. From childhood to old age, she was always the one everyone turned to for help, from her siblings to her nieces and nephews. She never got to live for herself. She lived as if she were the pillar holding up a crumbling house. Until one day, during a spiritual healing session, she was connected to the soul of her late grandmother. In a half-awake, half-dreaming state, she saw a truth. Her grandmother had once lost the entire family fortune in a crisis and lived the rest of her life in regret and a deep fear of scarcity. That fear energy was passed down into her bloodline. She wasn't born to enjoy, she was born to compensate. She wasn't allowed to rest because she carried the anxiety of someone no longer here. After that healing session, she began to change, not because others stopped relying on her, but because she began to forgive herself and even the souls who were no longer here. She stopped asking, "Why is my life so hard?" and began to say, "I understand now, and I will be the one to end this." Can you see it now? You're not repaying the debt of this life, you're carrying a forgotten debt from a life before. And here's the thing, only souls that are strong enough, steadfast enough, grounded enough are chosen to carry this sacred burden. You might feel alone, but in truth, you are standing among hundreds of thousands of souls, those who came before, bowing their heads in reverence to your courage. They couldn't finish it while they were alive, so they entrusted the debt to you, not to break you, but so you could bring it to an end. Do you remember the last time you felt exhausted from worrying about something that wasn't your direct problem? Have you ever felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility without knowing why? If the answer is yes, then you've already started to see it. You may not be the first to carry this weight, but you are the first to have the chance to set it down. And the only thing you need to do is accept this truth. This burden does not belong to you, but the healing of it, that is the gift only you can complete. Place your hand on your belly, the cradle of life, the place where your ancestors poured their bloodline into you, and say thank you, not because they were always right, but because they were once too fragile to do what you're doing now. The investigation you're going through, it's not a punishment. It is the initiation ritual of a soul chosen to end the cycles of lack that have echoed across generations. In this next part, you'll see that the light is no longer silent. Truth is rising, and the shells of deception have no place left to hide. Stay with me, because what's coming will unravel an entire empire of falsehoods with nothing but your silent presence. There are things you've seen for a very long time. You didn't speak them not because you didn't know, but because you waited for the truth to stand on its own, without screams, without anyone needing to defend it. That is the sacred gift of a Taurus soul. You can see the cracks in the foundation, feel the falsehood hiding behind a promise, and yet you do not expose it with anger. What has been hidden the longest is often what brings everything crashing down when it finally comes to light. And now, that collapse has begun. In the coming period, Neptune continues its journey, subtly dissolving illusions, while Vesta moves into your sign, Taurus. This combination highlights a period ripe for uncovering what is insincere or lacks true value in love, finances, and relationships. Truth may start revealing itself through subtle but powerful tests of reality. I used to believe that justice meant confrontation. You had to argue, shout, win, but I learned the opposite through observing Taurus souls. Justice can arrive in silence, like the turning of the earth. And the truth, it doesn't need your defense. Truth only needs time and light. I once witnessed a Taurus mother who, after a divorce, was slandered and left with nothing by her ex-husband. He took everything. She didn't sue. She didn't make a scene. She simply moved in with her daughter, worked humble jobs day by day, and quietly rebuilt her life. People said she was too passive, but they didn't understand she was waiting for something no one else could see. 7 years later, her ex-husband was investigated for financial misconduct. All his assets were frozen, and within the legal records, a portion of property that was rightfully hers, which he had unlawfully claimed, was discovered. The court returned everything to her. She never had to appear. She never had to say a word. Do you see now? That's how truth wins, not through force, but through substance. You don't have to chase justice. It will come to you in a way no one expects. You don't have to scream to prove you're right, because truth has its own weight, and when it settles, everything false begins to crumble. Truth doesn't like noise. It arrives like the dawn, slow, silent, and unstoppable. If anyone ever believed you would never stand on your own, then today, your quiet existence is the loudest rebellion. Those who once thought you would never recover now tremble because you are still here, and you are still solid. You don't need to tear anything down, because everything false will fall on its own. If lately you've felt the urge to distance yourself from someone, if you felt disgusted toward a relationship that once felt valuable, if you're no longer excited about things that once satisfied you, that is a sign the truth is getting closer. Trust that, and instead of speaking it, let it reveal itself. Stay silent and feel the truth approaching. You've seen enough, felt enough, known enough, and because you didn't speak, the truth remained pure. Imagine you are bedrock. All truth will eventually settle upon you, and all those who are false will be worn away by time. You don't need to expose anyone. They will expose themselves, because reality has no room for pretense. And now, the final part is drawing near, where every collapse leads to a new kind of freedom, and where you'll realize everything you once thought was a loss was actually the first step toward liberation. Some things look like endings, but are actually the beginning of a new lifetime. Some moments seem like collapse, but they are when your soul breaks the chains you couldn't see. You're not being imprisoned. You're being protected from the very things that once made you forget who you are. Jupiter, the planet of expansion, has just moved from your sign into Gemini, the sign of words, truth, and expression. For Taurus souls, this is the moment the universe not only gives you deep stability, but dares you to live your truth, not just to endure, but to break free from the shell that once protected you from your own voice. Nothing in your life is random, and every shock, every quake carries a message. The shocks in your life don't come to destroy you. They come to force your soul out of its familiar cage. You may have been struck down by injustice. You may have once believed you didn't have the strength to rise, but you are still here, and that is proof you have survived the harshest invisible sentence, the prison of your own endurance. Ancient wisdom teaches us that without collapse, there is no rebuilding. Sometimes the hardest blow is actually the greatest release. I once knew a Taurus man, gentle and quiet, who never harmed a soul in his life. One day, the company he'd worked at for 20 years went bankrupt, and he was wrongly blamed for a major error. His whole family crumbled. Whispers flew. Everyone assumed he was guilty. He stayed silent, not out of fear, but because he knew if he had done no wrong, the truth would come. And it did. An audit exposed the real person who had manipulated the documents. Not only was he cleared of all charges, but a rival company, impressed by his integrity throughout the ordeal, hired him for a senior position. Do you see, the collapse didn't come to destroy him? It came to pull him out of a place he no longer belonged. Many of us live our whole lives inside a cage of quiet suffering fear that will no longer be needed. Fear of being judged, fear of losing our security, fear of the truth. But the moment you face the thing you fear most, you're no longer imprisoned, because no one can punish someone who is no longer afraid of loss. The collapse is a symbol, so you no longer imprison yourself in your own sense of duty. You have survived everything that was supposed to break you. You have endured the looks of contempt. You have lived among lies and still kept your heart true. So now, you can live your truth, no longer hiding behind your wounds, no longer bowing your head to anyone. You are no longer a soul on trial. You are a survivor. You are the chosen one. You are the one who embodies the earth's strength. Place your hand on your heart and whisper, "I am free. Free from the burden. Free from others' expectations. Free from the past. And free from the sentence of endurance I once gave myself." This is not the end. This is a rebirth. A journey has just ended. A karmic cycle has just been released. And you, Taurus soul, have done what few are brave enough to do. You have endured. You have remained true. You have risen above it all. Now is the time to close this journey with the most sacred blessing for your soul. May your foundation always be solid. May truth always be your compass. And may every soul who once hurt you learn the lesson they need not for your revenge, but so they never do it again to anyone else. If these words touched you, leave a sign, a commitment to yourself, a forgiveness to the past, or simply a single line, "I have been seen and I am free." I'll meet you in the next message, where light no longer needs to hide, and you don't need to prove your worth. Life will do that for you. That investigation didn't come to destroy you. It came to vindicate a soul who lived rightly but was treated wrongly. And if you're still here, it means you're still chosen. Leave a message to yourself in the comments as a ceremony to let your old soul finally depart and your new life finally begin.